Now, a host of NATO member states have been coming out to say they won't be sending troops to Ukraine. The clarifications coming after French President Emmanuel Macron left the door open to the suggestion at a meeting in Paris on Monday. While authorities in Ukraine welcome the idea, NATO says it doesn't want a direct conflict with Moscow. For more on this story, we can bring in our international affairs editor, Philip Turle. Philip, great to see you. What was Macron thinking when he said what he said, and does he not think that Ukraine can win this war on its own?
I don't think he thinks Ukraine can win the war on its own. I think that is a pretty widespread thought amongst many NATO members and Western nations that if Ukraine is going to win this war, it's going to depend on how much it gets from the West in the way of munitions and in the way of support. And I think, in the words of Emmanuel Macron, in the possibility that in the long run the West may be obliged to send in ground forces. If you look at the sentence that he said, there's no consensus to officially send ground troops to Ukraine, but nothing should be ruled out. No consensus, nothing should be ruled out, but we must do everything we can to make sure Russia does not win this war. That is also an upping of the ante from Emmanuel Macron compared to his comments of a couple of years ago, where it was, let's not humiliate Vladimir Putin, and he went to Moscow to try to negotiate with the Russian president to stop the war from happening. That, of course, didn't work out. So an upping from the ante by Emmanuel Macron. This has become the big talking point here in France over the past 24 hours. Everybody is talking about it. It's in the front page of the newspapers. It's been on domestic television non-stop since yesterday. All of France's European allies have, one after the other, said, we don't agree with this statement. So was he caught off guard? Well, we don't really know. Was this just a remark off the cuff that
they had all of yesterday to issue a clarification?
He didn't, but he did have his Prime Minister, Gabriel Attal, who has backed up what Emmanuel Macron said, and also the Foreign Minister, Stéphane Séjourné, who has said, well, we may not be sending troops, ground forces to Ukraine. What Emmanuel Macron said doesn't mean necessarily that NATO is going to get involved in this conflict. What it does mean maybe is that we're going to send forces into Ukraine to try to boost Ukrainian forces by helping with demining, by helping with repairs, by helping with training, all of those measures, but not actually on the front line fighting Russian forces. So therefore the Russians can't accuse us of being involved in actually fighting against them and bringing NATO into the into the fight.
I mean, boots on the ground are boots on the ground regardless of what they're doing, because Moscow says that any member state that sends forces to Ukraine are suddenly directly involved in the conflict. But Moscow has been alleging that this conflict in Ukraine is a proxy war with NATO anyways.
Well, I think that NATO doesn't want to get involved. That's pretty sure here. The only comment we've had, the only favourable comment that's come forward out of all of the comments over the past 24 hours has been from Ukraine itself, which has said surprise. Well, of course, President Macron has sent a good signal by not ruling out deploying Western troops on the ground in Ukraine. He's now demonstrating a deep understanding of the risks posed to Europe by this war. That's the only positive statement. The United States, NATO, Germany, Spain, Sweden, all of these countries have said, no, we're not going to get involved. No, we're not going to send ground forces to Ukraine, principally because that will be perceived by Russia as NATO getting directly involved in the war in Ukraine, and that's something we don't want. That is to say, a direct conflict between NATO on one side and Russia on the other, with Ukraine in the middle. So I don't think that we're going to see in the short term any deployment by NATO forces, Western forces, boots on the ground in Ukraine. What we have also seen over the past 24 hours, and I think that something we need to bear in mind, is that France is heading up like the other EU members to European elections this year. There's been a lot of bickering going on between the far right, the National Rally, over the fact that Emmanuel Macron is not playing things right as far as the war in Ukraine is concerned. There's now a debate in Parliament about support for Ukraine that's going to take place. I think Emmanuel Macron's trying to expose the far-right National Rally, which is leading in the opinion polls, as being a party that is playing a double game, that would like to support the Russians but doesn't dare say so, and therefore they're going to have to come up and say who they stand in favour of when this debate takes place in Parliament. I think that also explains why Emmanuel Macron made those comments.